1980, immigrants made up 2.6% of Denmark's population. By 2025, that number had climbed to roughly 14%, and when you include the Danish-born children of immigrants, the total share of immigrant-origin residents sits close to 20%. 1 in 5. Denmark recruited guest workers from Turkey and Pakistan during the economic boom of the 1960s and early 1970s to fill labor shortages in expanding industries, before officially ending the recruitment program in 1973, expecting them to eventually return home. Many never did. Families followed. Communities formed. The political class assumed integration would sort itself out. By the mid-2000s, unemployment among non-Western immigrants was several times higher than the national average. Only about 55% of children from non-Western backgrounds finished upper secondary school by age 25, compared with around 85% of ethnic Danes. In some areas, so many people depended on welfare that, if the same level had existed across the whole country, it could have put Denmark's welfare system under huge financial pressure. Danish reports also found other problems, including honor-based violence, forced marriages, and informal community courts that settled disputes outside Danish law. For a country built on the idea that everyone should have the same rights and follow the same laws, this was seen like a separate legal system was developing inside the existing one. Ordinary Danes felt those cracks before. They were not afraid of immigrants as people. They were afraid of losing the high-trust social glue that let 6 million people fund one of the most expensive welfare states on Earth. You cannot run a Nordic model without an almost instinctive belief that everyone plays by the same rules. Once that belief cracks, the machine starts to grind. In 2018, the Danish government published a plan called One Denmark Without Parallel Societies. The document ranked neighborhoods using 5 criteria: unemployment, crime, education, average income, and the share of residents from non-Western backgrounds. If an area had more than 50% non-Western residents and also met enough of the other criteria, it was officially called a parallel society. If it stayed on the list for 5 years, it became a transformation area. Housing associations in these areas were legally required to reduce social housing by 40% by 2030. In practice, this meant demolishing buildings, selling homes to private developers, and not renewing some long-term tenants' leases. Families who had lived there for 30 years, raised children, and run businesses in the area were told their homes would be demolished to change the area's population mix. The most famous case was Mjølnerparken in Copenhagen, called one of the coolest neighborhoods in the world by international travel media. The Danish state called it a parallel society and began dismantling it. Residents protested, but the demolitions continued. Crime penalties were doubled inside designated zones. The same theft, twice the prison time, on one side of a Copenhagen street as the other. Daycare was made mandatory for children from listed areas, so the state could shape language and values from year one. Parents who refused lost welfare benefits. In December 2025, the European Court of Justice ruled the scheme may breach EU anti-discrimination rules and sent it back to Danish courts. In almost any other European country, that ends the policy overnight. Denmark shrugged. The demolitions continued. Denmark looked at the EU's highest court and did not change course. In May 2018, the Danish parliament voted 75-30 to ban any garment covering the face in public. The justice minister at the time skipped the diplomacy entirely. Covering the face, he said, was incompatible with Danish values and disrespectful to the community. Denmark, he said, was drawing a line. Here, people meet each other face to face. A 2022 YouGov poll found 72% of Danes supporting the veil ban. Denmark had already moved on religious practice before the veil ban. In 2014, the government banned halal and kosher slaughter by requiring animals to be pre-stunned. Other leaders called it discriminatory. The agriculture minister replied that animal welfare comes before religion. When faith collides with a Danish secular value, the secular value wins. From 2023, Denmark pushed to phase out prayer rooms in schools and universities. Foreign-funded, religious institutions came next. These institutions were required to disclose external financing. Imams preaching anti-democratic or anti-integration messages faced expanded hate speech enforcement. Since 2019, the Social Democrats have openly described their goal as a zero refugee policy. Not low, simply zero. The explicit stated aim is that as few foreign nationals as possible should receive asylum in Denmark. The numbers show it working. In 2015, at the peak of European migration pressure, Denmark received more than 21,000 asylum applications. By late 2025, only 839 had been approved for the entire year, against a total submission count that was itself at historic lows. British officials calculated Denmark's policies had pushed successful claims to a 40-year low, with roughly 95% of rejected applicants actually removed from the country, not simply rejected on paper. Immigration Minister Rasmus Stoklund said it plainly in January 2026. It was critical that as few foreigners as possible obtain asylum in Denmark. That sentence was not a slip. It was policy. Denmark is not done. As of July 2026, the Danish government has announced a new investigation into whether to ban the Islamic call to prayer across the country. If such a ban is introduced, it would be a major step in the debate over religion in Danish public life. It would raise a bigger question: how much religious expression should be allowed in public spaces, and who should decide? Just 4 years ago, this idea would have seemed unthinkable. Here is the strangest part of the whole story. Every single policy was designed and implemented by Denmark's Social Democrats, the party that in every other European country is the gentle voice on migration. In Denmark, they became the hammer. The logic ran simply: you cannot fund universal healthcare, free university, and generous pensions while running an open door to permanent settlement. Either the welfare state goes or the open door goes. By 2022, the traditional Danish left had gone quiet. No major party was arguing for the open door era to return. The debate had moved from whether to restrict to how far to restrict. That consensus is exactly why the Danish model is so difficult for outsiders to dismantle. Inside the country, almost no one with political weight wants to. On March 25, 2026, Denmark went to the polls. Frederiksen, who had spent 6 years being called Europe's toughest center-left leader on migration, was expected to coast to a third term. The Social Democrats received 21.9% of the vote, their worst general election result since 1903. Neither the left bloc nor the right bloc secured a majority. 12 parties. No clear winner. Frederiksen spent weeks trying to assemble a cross-bloc coalition. It collapsed. On May 9, 2026, King Frederik X asked liberal leader trolls Lund Poulsen to build a center-right government instead. In the coalition talks that followed, the Danish People's Party offered conditional support tied to a significantly stricter immigration platform. Their stated goal was reducing net immigration to the point of long-term population decline among certain immigrant groups. Not lower immigration, not stricter integration. The active, deliberate reduction of specific communities already living in Denmark. A center-left prime minister adopted the hardest immigration regime in Western Europe, won 2 elections on it, neutralized her far-right opposition by taking their platform, and lost power anyway to a coalition that judged her stance too lenient. The Overton window in Denmark did not shift. It fractured. Frederiksen opened a door she may not have intended to open, and the coalition that walked through it went further than she ever went herself. Denmark's election result was still being processed in Copenhagen when the rest of Europe was already busy copying its earlier work. In November 2025, the British Home Secretary unveiled the most significant change to UK asylum policy in modern times. She replaced permanent refugee status with temporary protection. The framework was openly modeled on Denmark. A Labour government, the British equivalent of a Social Democrat government, citing Copenhagen by name. Sweden, which had been Denmark's humane opposite through the 2010s, taking the highest per capita refugee intake in Europe in 2015, quietly switched sides. Asylum applications were down 30% in 2025, down roughly 60% since the center-right coalition took power in 2022. Swedish ministers now describe their framework as Danish style. The Netherlands, Austria, Germany, Italy, all named Denmark in policy speeches. The European Commission's own Home Affairs Directorate publishes studies treating Danish integration policy less as a problem and more as a case study. Denmark tried integration for 3 decades. By the data, it judged that attempt a failure. And it pivoted hard, deliberately with public support and without apology. The demolitions are real. The evictions are happening. And the government is now investigating a possible ban on the Islamic call to prayer. Did a tiny Nordic country see Europe's future 10 years early and act while there was still time? Or did it give the rest of the West permission to dismantle something 70 years in the making? That question is not rhetorical. It is the one Europe is going to be answering for the next 20 years. And Denmark got there first.